The Xylos Syndicate had conquered 17 star systems by outsmarting everything that moved. Their probability engines could predict particle decay, economic collapse, and the exact moment an enemy commander would order breakfast. They had never met a species they couldn't map down to the last heartbeat. Then they found Earth, and their machines started screaming. The observation deck of the Vindicator smelled like recycled copper and the faint sweetness of Xylos metabolic stabilizers. Commander Vextal stood with all four arms folded across his thorax, watching the blue-green marble rotate beneath his ship. His third eye, the one reserved for tactical assessment, had been open for 70 standard hours. It was starting to ache. "The probability matrices are diverging again," said analyst Jervok from the navigation pit. His voice carried that particular tremor Xylos used only when they were trying very hard not to panic. "The human behavior models have produced 17 contradictory outcomes for the next 30 minutes alone." Vextal's mandibles clicked once, a sign of irritation. 17, 23 now. The engine is... Jervok paused, tapping his primary manipulator against the crystalline display. "The engine is smoking, Commander." Vextal turned slowly. His carapace made that dry scraping sound that junior officers learned to fear on their first day. Smoking. White smoke. Possibly gray. The technical manual does not specify a color for this particular failure state, because the technical manual does not contain a failure state for this particular failure state. A human would have sighed. Xylos did not sigh. Xylos calculated optimal respiratory responses and then executed them with mechanical precision. Vextal stood perfectly still for a full 4 seconds, an eternity in Xylos' command protocol, before walking to the navigation pit. The probability engine was, in fact, smoking. A thin tendril of pale vapor rose from its central processing core, carrying the acrid smell of burning crystal and offended mathematics. The display screens flickered through cascading error messages, each one more desperate than the last. Error. Recursive loop detected in human emotional projection error. Threshold exceeded for irrational decision-making parameters error. Human subject 8472 has contradicted own established behavior model warning. Engine integrity compromised warning. Please do not attempt to calculate human behavior fatal. We told you, so the last message blinked 3 times before the entire system went dark. The engine didn't just crash, Jervok whispered, his secondary eyes wide. The engine gave up. I didn't know engines could give up. Vextal stared at the dead machine. Show me the raw data. The unprocessed observations from the surface team. Jervok's manipulators trembled as he pulled up the feed. 7 Xylos observers had been embedded on Earth for 3 months, disguised as local fauna, or at least as close to local fauna as Xylos biology allowed. They had observed humans in their natural habitats, workplaces, homes, recreational facilities, and the strange ritual spaces humans called bars. The footage that played on the main screen made no sense. Human subject 347, a male of approximately 30 Earth years, had been observed climbing a vertical rock face without safety equipment. The probability engine had assigned a 94.7% likelihood that he would fall and sustain fatal injuries. He did not fall. He reached the top, stood there breathing heavily, and then climbed back down to do it again. The engine had revised its prediction to 99.1% on the second attempt. He still did not fall. By the 7th attempt, the engine had simply stopped calculating and displayed the word Y in 17 languages. Human subject 892, a female of approximately 62 Earth years, had been observed arguing with a customer service representative about a refund for a defective product. The representative had no authority to grant the refund. Corporate policy explicitly forbade it. Every logical parameter suggested the interaction should have ended within 3 minutes with the human leaving in defeat. The argument lasted 47 minutes. The customer service representative cried. The human received her refund, an additional store credit, and a handwritten apology from the regional manager. The engine had labeled this outcome statistically impossible and moved on. But the footage that concerned Vextal most was human subject 12. A child, approximately 7 Earth years old. The observers had filmed her in a residential structure during what humans called a thunderstorm. The child was afraid. That much was clear from her elevated heart rate and the trembling of her small limbs. A Xylos juvenile, under identical circumstances, would have retreated to a secure position and waited for the threat to pass. The human child did not retreat. She stood at the window, watching the lightning, and then she began to speak to it. "You're loud," she said, her voice shaking. "But you can't get me. I'm inside. And my dad says you're just electricity. So there." She paused, watching another flash illuminate the sky. "I'm not scared of you. I'm not. I'm not scared of anything. Not even monsters. Because monsters are just things we haven't named yet. And once you name something, it can't hurt you as much." She thought about this for a moment, then added, "I name you Steve." The probability engine, reviewing this footage later, had attempted to model the child's emotional trajectory. It had produced a result so statistically anomalous that the system's error log simply read, "This is not how fear works. This is not how anything works." Vextal shut off the feed. "Recall the surface team," he said quietly. "We are not ready for this species. Jurvoke hesitated. Commander, the Syndicate Council has already authorized first contact. The diplomatic vessel arrives in 12 standard hours." The silence that followed was the kind of silence that happens right before something breaks. Then Vextal said slowly, "We have 12 hours to figure out what humans actually are. Because right now, our machines are telling us they're a statistical impossibility that yells at lightning and names their fears after mid-level managers." He turned to face the main view screen, where Earth continued its indifferent rotation. "Begin deep observation. Every human interaction, every recorded historical event, every piece of cultural output we can access. I want to know why their probability profiles look like the universe glitched." Jurvok nodded and began issuing orders. But his tertiary eye kept drifting back to the dead probability engine, still smoking faintly in the corner. He had served in the Xylos Observation Corps for 40 years. He had watched species rise and fall. He had seen civilizations that ran on pure logic and species that operated on instinct alone. He had never seen a machine commit suicide rather than admit it didn't understand something. The human child had named the storm Steve. Jurvok found himself wondering if the storm had liked its name. He shook the thought away. That wasn't analysis. That was something else. Something the probability engine would have called irrelevant right before it exploded. The deep observation began. Within the first hour, the analysts uncovered the following. Humans had a documented history of punching predators in the face. Not killing them, not running from them, punching them. The practice was uncommon, but not unheard of, and in several documented cases, it had worked. The predators had simply left, confused, presumably, by prey that fought back with its soft, vulnerable face hands. Humans formed emotional attachments to inanimate objects. They named their vehicles, their weapons, their homes. They sang to plants. They apologized to furniture they bumped into. One human had reportedly spent 3 days searching for a specific rock because it had a good face and he didn't want it to be lonely. Humans experienced something they called spite. The concept alone caused the probability engine's backup systems to overheat. Spite, as defined by human cultural records, was the willingness to suffer negative consequences, specifically to ensure someone else also suffered negative consequences. There was no logical benefit, no strategic advantage, just the deep, burning need to watch your enemy lose even if you lost too. Xylos physiology had no equivalent. The translation matrix simply displayed emotion, self-destructive, weaponized stubbornness. Humans had used spite to win wars they should have lost, to survive conditions that should have killed them, to outperform machines that should have outperformed them. They had looked at impossible odds, calculated their chances of success, and then done it anyway because someone said they couldn't. The probability engine, if it had still been functional, would have classified this as suicidal ideation. The humans classified it as Tuesday. By hour 8, Jervok had developed a headache behind all 3 of his eyes. He had been watching human entertainment media, trying to understand their values, and had encountered something called professional wrestling. He needed to sit down. The humans, he said slowly, have created a performance art in which costumed individuals pretend to engage in combat while following a predetermined narrative. The audience knows it is predetermined. The performers know the audience knows. And yet the audience experiences genuine emotional investment in the outcomes. Vextal stared at him. Why? That is the question I have been asking for 4 hours. The answer appears to be, because it's fun. Fun. Another concept the engine struggled with. Humans pursue activities specifically because those activities provide no survival benefit and may in fact cause harm. They call this recreation. They have died doing it. They continue doing it anyway. Vextal's primary arms unfolded and refold. Show me the most illogical human behavior you have found. The one that makes the least evolutionary sense. Jervok didn't hesitate. He pulled up the file he had been avoiding all morning. Altruistic self-sacrifice for non-kin, he said. Humans have documented thousands of cases where an individual has died to save someone they had no biological connection to. No mating potential. No social obligation. Sometimes complete strangers. They jump on grenades. They push children out of the path of vehicles. They run into burning buildings. He paused, his voice dropping to something approaching wonder. They do it without calculating, without hesitation. The probability engine tried to model the decision-making process behind these actions and concluded that there was no decision-making process. The humans simply act. Their bodies move before their minds catch up. By the time they could logically decide not to do it, they've already done it. Vextal was silent for a long moment. The engine, he finally said, concluded they weren't thinking. Yes, Commander. And yet they survive. As a species, they thrive. They spread across their planet and reached for the stars despite, or perhaps because of, this complete failure of self-preservation logic. The engine could not reconcile the data. It tried for 73 hours before the smoking began. Vextal looked at the view screen again. Earth was entering its night cycle. Lights flickered on across the darkening continents. Millions of tiny points of illumination, each one representing humans doing something humans did. Living probably, or having fun, or naming things, or punching predators. He had 12 hours until the diplomatic vessel arrived. He had no idea what he was going to tell them. One more question, he said. The child, the one who named the thunder. What did her probability profile look like? Before the engine crashed, Jervok checked the records. When he looked up, all 3 of his eyes were wide. The engine attempted to project her future behavior across a 70-year timeline. It produced approximately 400,000 possible outcomes. Every single one diverged from every other within the first 6 months. The engine concluded that her behavior was fundamentally unpredictable and that any attempt to model it would require more processing power than the known universe contains. He swallowed. The engine then wrote a single line of analysis before it died. I didn't notice it before. He pulled up the final log entry. Error. Human behavior cannot be calculated because human behavior is not a calculation. It is a conversation. And the universe has not yet learned all the words. Vextal read the line 3 times. Then, he went to prepare for first contact, carrying with him the uncomfortable realization that the Xylos Syndicate had just made the greatest tactical error in its history. They had assumed humans could be understood. They were about to learn that humans could only be experienced. The diplomatic vessel consensus arrived 3 hours ahead of schedule, which was itself a diplomatic statement. The Xylos did nothing ahead of schedule unless they wanted to catch someone unprepared. Vextal watched from the observation deck as the massive ship slid into orbit, its crystalline hull catching Earth's reflected light and scattering it into 1,000 colors. The consensus was beautiful in the way all Xylos ships were beautiful, geometrically perfect functionally precise, aesthetically cold. It looked like something that had been designed by a committee and then refined by machines, which, Vextal reflected, was exactly what it was. Ambassador Thukel disembarked within the hour, crossing the umbilical tube with the measured gait of someone who had never been surprised in his life and did not intend to start now. He was old by Xylo's standards. His carapace had faded from deep crimson to a dusty rose, and he carried himself with the weight of centuries of diplomatic victories. He also carried a new probability engine. Vextal noticed it immediately, tucked into the ambassador's personal transport case. The latest model, military grade, capable of processing quadrillion-point data sets in real time. Commander Vextal, Thrakel said, his mandibles arranged in the formal greeting configuration. I trust the malfunction has been resolved. Vextal considered several responses. He considered lying, which was against Xylo's protocol, but sometimes necessary. He considered telling the truth, which was also against Xylo's protocol, but sometimes necessary in different ways. He considered simply screaming, which was against every protocol, but seemed increasingly appropriate. The probability engine did not malfunction, he said carefully. It encountered a fundamental limitation in its operating parameters and elected to cease functioning rather than continue producing invalid results. Thrakel's third eye blinked. That was the only indication that he had registered anything unusual. Invalid results. The engine projected human behavior with approximately the same accuracy as random chance, possibly less. At one point, it predicted that a human would spontaneously combust while singing. The human did not spontaneously combust. The human was not singing. The human was eating what appeared to be processed grain product while watching moving images of other humans engaging in athletic competition. Thrakel's mandibles shifted to the configuration for mild concern, and the engine predicted this based on what data? All of it. The engine had access to the complete historical record of human civilization. Every book, every film, every recorded conversation, every scientific paper, every piece of art, music, and literature. The engine analyzed the entire output of a species across 10,000 years of recorded history, and concluded that the most likely outcome of any given human situation was that a human would spontaneously burst into flame while performing a musical number. The ambassador's transport case made a soft whirring sound. The new probability engine was warming up. Perhaps, Frel said slowly, the engine was attempting to calculate the probability of a highly specific edge case, and the engine was attempting to calculate the probability that a human would finish their workday, return to their residence, consume an evening meal, and sleep for approximately 8 hours. That was the baseline query. The engine returned 17 million possible variations, none of which matched the observed outcome. The observed human, by the way, finished work, returned home, ate dinner, and slept for 7 hours and 43 minutes. A perfectly average evening. And the engine could not predict it. The new probability engine's whirring grew louder. A small light on its casing flickered from blue to yellow. With respect, Commander, Frel said, you are suggesting that a species capable of building civilization, developing technology, and achieving spaceflight is fundamentally unpredictable at the individual level. That defies every principle of statistical analysis. I am not suggesting it, Ambassador. I am reporting it. The difference between us is that I have spent 3 months watching the evidence, and you have spent 3 months sitting in a diplomatic suite reading reports that your staff filtered through their own biases. The words came out sharper than Vextal intended. He watched Thrakel's mandibles cycle through 3 different emotional configurations before settling on diplomatic neutrality. Show me, the ambassador said. They spent the next 4 hours in the observation room, watching footage. Thrakel watched in silence as humans did things that made no sense. A human male spending his entire life savings to build a working replica of a fictional spaceship from an ancient entertainment program. A human female swimming across an ocean simply because it was there. A group of humans gathering in a field to watch other humans kick a ball into a net. their emotional responses so intense that several required medical attention. The new probability engine ran continuously, its lights cycling through yellow, orange, and, finally, settling on a deep, angry red. The engine is experiencing difficulty, Jurvok reported from his station. It has requested additional processing resources 3 times in the last hour. I have denied the requests. Why? Thrakiel asked. Because the engine's proposed solutions to its processing limitations include redesign human neural architecture and redefine the fundamental nature of choice. The engine appears to be suggesting that humans are not difficult to predict because the data is insufficient, but rather because the humans are making decisions that do not follow from their prior states. He paused, reading the latest error messages. The engine is now asking if humans have free will. It appears to be having what humans might call an existential crisis. The room fell silent. On the view screen, a human was attempting to teach a dog to use a skateboard. The dog was not cooperating. The human was not giving up. This had been going on for 3 hours. What do we know, Fravel finally asked, about human combat capabilities? Vextal had been waiting for this question. He had prepared extensively for it. He had compiled dossiers, tactical analyses, and strategic projections. He had done everything a Xylo's commander was supposed to do when evaluating a potential threat. He took a deep breath, a human gesture he had picked up during observation and found surprisingly useful, and began. On paper, humans are unremarkable. Their physical strength is moderate. Their sensory range is narrow. They have no natural weapons to speak of. Their limbs are fragile. Their internal organs are exposed. They require constant temperature regulation, frequent caloric intake, and regular periods of unconsciousness to maintain basic function. He paused. In practice, humans are the most dangerous species the Syndicate has ever encountered. Thrakiel's mandibles tightened. Explain. Human endurance exceeds Xylo's capacity by a factor of approximately 4 to 1. They can pursue prey for days without rest. They can operate on minimal sleep for extended periods. They can withstand pain that would trigger Xylo's shutdown reflexes. They have been documented continuing to fight with broken bones, organ damage, and injuries that should have rendered them unconscious. He pulled up the relevant files. Human tactical thinking is nonlinear. They do not follow optimal paths. They do not retreat when retreat is logical. They do not surrender when surrender is inevitable. They have won battles by doing things that make no tactical sense, purely because their opponents could not anticipate actions that lack strategic value. Examples, Thrakiel demanded. During one of their planetary conflicts, a human commander deliberately landed his forces in the wrong location. The landing site had no strategic value. The terrain was disadvantageous. His supply lines were exposed. By every measure, it was a catastrophic tactical error. His opponents, expecting rational behavior, had concentrated their forces elsewhere. The human walked through undefended territory and won the war. That is not irrational. That is deception. Any species can. The human commander did not know the terrain was undefended. He did not know his opponents had concentrated their forces elsewhere. He landed in the wrong location because his navigation equipment was malfunctioning and he refused to admit it. The victory was entirely accidental. He later admitted this in his memoirs, and the response from his species was not criticism, but celebration. They called it audacity. They made him a hero. Thrakiel's third, I was fully open now. A sign of intense focus. You are telling me that a species achieved military victory through incompetence, and their response was to praise the incompetent commander? I'm telling you that human success is not predicted by human planning. Humans succeed because they refuse to stop. They fail. They fail constantly. They fail catastrophically. And then they get up and try something else, usually something dumber, and occasionally that dumb thing works, and when it works, they do it again until it stops working, at which point they find a new dumb thing. Vextal gestured at the view screen, where the human had finally given up on the skateboard and was now attempting to teach the dog to dance. That is their strategy. Try everything. Fail at most of it. Succeed at enough of it to survive. And never, ever stop trying, because stopping is the only thing they've identified as an actual failure state. The new probability engine made a sound. It was not a sound that engines were supposed to make. It was high-pitched and wavering, like a scream being filtered through layers of diplomatic protocol. The engine, Jervok said quietly, has begun deleting its own data. It is attempting to reduce its processing load by forgetting everything it has learned about humans. Can it do that? Fracael asked. It appears to be doing that. It has already erased its historical files on human warfare and is now working on human economics. It seems to be prioritizing the retention of human art, which it has labeled incomprehensible but aesthetically valuable. The engine made the screaming sound again. A small wisp of smoke rose from its casing. Fracael watched the smoke for a long moment. Then, he did something Vextal had never seen a Xylo's ambassador do. He laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. Xylo's laughter was a dry, clicking noise that bore approximately the same relationship to human laughter as a car crash bore to a musical performance. But it was unmistakably, undeniably laughter. I have spent 400 years believing that all intelligence could be measured, predicted, and ultimately controlled, Fracael said. I have negotiated with species that ran on logic, species that ran on instinct, and species that ran on something I could never quite identify, but could always eventually understand. I have never encountered a species that made my machines want to die. He looked at the view screen, where the human had abandoned the dog, and was now attempting to teach the skateboard to dance. Schedule first contact for tomorrow morning. Local time. I want to meet them in person. I want to look into their soft, vulnerable face hands and ask them why they do the things they do. Ambassador, Vextal said carefully, I should warn you that humans have a documented tendency to respond to diplomatic overtures with suspicion. They may not trust us. They may not cooperate. They may punch me in the face. Statistically unlikely, but not impossible. The probability engine gave it a 3.7% chance before it started deleting its files. Fracael's mandibles shifted into the configuration for amused acceptance. I have survived 4 assassination attempts, 2 hostage situations, and 1 unfortunate incident involving a carnivorous plant and a diplomatic misunderstanding. I think I can survive a human. He turned to leave the observation deck, then paused. Commander, the engine deleted its files on human warfare. But you've been studying these creatures for months. What's your assessment? If it came to conflict, if the Syndicate found itself facing human military forces, what would happen? Vextal had been asking himself this question since the first probability engine crashed. He had run the scenarios in his head 1,000 times. He had considered every variable, every advantage, every possible outcome. I don't know, he said honestly, and that's the answer that frightens me most. I've spent my entire career knowing, calculating, predicting, and now I'm looking at a species that makes prediction impossible. If we fought them, we might win. We might lose. We might fight forever because they don't know how to stop, and we don't know how to start something we can't finish. He looked at Earth, blue and green and white against the black. The only thing I know for certain is that we would regret it. Not because they would defeat us. Not because we would defeat them. But because we would have to spend the rest of our existence trying to understand what we'd started, and I don't think the universe contains enough processing power for that particular task. Fracael was quiet for a long time. Tomorrow morning, he finally said, I want to meet them. He left. The new probability engine continued to smoke. Jervok watched it for a moment, then pulled up the final file it had saved before beginning its data purge. Human art. Specifically, a piece of human writing from an ancient Earth civilization. A play, according to the metadata. Something about a storm. Jervok read the first line. There are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy. He read it again. Then he turned off the engine and went to prepare for first contact, carrying with him the uncomfortable realization that the Xylos Syndicate had spent centuries mastering the art of understanding the universe, and they had somehow missed the one species that had been asking the right questions all along. First contact occurred at 8:47 Earth Eastern Standard Time in a conference room that had been hastily converted from a cargo bay on the Vindicator. The humans had sent 3 representatives, a diplomat named Elena Vasquez, a military advisor named Colonel James Okonkwo, and a scientist named Dr. Aristhorn. The scientist was the one who worried Vextal most. Diplomats could be negotiated with. Military advisors could be predicted. But scientists ask questions. And humans, he had learned, had a particular talent for asking questions that had no answers. Ambassador Thrakel opened the proceedings with the standard Xylos greeting, a formal recitation of the Syndicate's peaceful intentions, followed by a request for mutual cooperation and cultural exchange. Elena Vasquez listened with the expression of someone who had heard similar speeches before and was mentally calculating how many ways they could go wrong. "That's a very pretty speech, Ambassador," she said when he finished. "But my government has 3 questions before we proceed." Thrakel's mandibles arranged themselves into diplomatic openness. "Please. First, why did your ship spend 3 months observing us without initiating contact? Second, why did your probability engine explode? Third, why are you really here?" The silence that followed was the kind of silence that happens when someone has just asked the one question you were hoping they wouldn't ask. Thrakel glanced at Vextal. Vextal glanced at Jurvok. Jurvok glanced at the dead probability engine, which was still sitting in the corner, now cold and dark. The engine did not explode. Thrakel said carefully. It elected to cease functioning. Elena's eyebrow rose. It was a small movement, almost imperceptible. But Vextal had been studying humans for months. He knew that particular eyebrow movement. Your machine chose to kill itself? After extensive exposure to human behavioral data, yes. Colonel Okonkwo leaned forward. He was a large man, by human standards, which meant enormous by Xylos standards, with the kind of face that had seen things and decided not to talk about them. "What exactly did your machine see that made it give up?" Thrakel opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Your species," he finally said, "does not behave according to any known model of rational decision-making. You pursue goals that have no survival value. You form attachments to objects, locations, and concepts that offer no evolutionary benefit. You sacrifice yourselves for strangers. You fight when fighting is illogical. You stop fighting when fighting would be easy. You have created art that makes no sense, and music that should not work, and stories that contradict themselves from sentence to sentence." He paused, searching for words. "And somehow, despite all of this, perhaps because of all of this, you have survived. You have thrived. You have reached a point in your development where you could, if you chose, become a significant factor in galactic civilization. And we cannot predict what you will do next. We cannot even predict what you will do in the next 5 minutes. Our most advanced technology applied to your species produces nothing but smoke and existential despair." Dr. Thorne spoke for the first time. His voice was quiet, almost gentle. "Ambassador," he said, "are you telling us that we broke your computer because we're too weird to calculate?" The translation matrix rendered weird as statistically anomalous to the point of computational failure. Thrakel considered correcting the translation, then decided that weird was probably more accurate. "Yes," he said, "that is exactly what I am telling you. Elena knows it." It was a human laugh, warm, genuine, slightly incredulous. Vextal had heard humans laugh before, but never in a diplomatic context. It was, he realized, probably not standard protocol. "Ambassador," she said, still smiling, "we've been breaking computers with our weirdness since we invented computers. You're in good company." Thrakel's mandibles twitched. He wasn't sure if she was mocking him or offering genuine comfort. With humans, he was learning the two were often indistinguishable. The Syndicate Council has authorized me to propose a formal alliance, he said, steering the conversation back to familiar ground. Trade agreements, cultural exchange, mutual defense pacts, standard diplomatic framework. Elena's smile faded. She looked at Colonel Okonkwo, who shrugged almost imperceptibly. She looked at Dr. Thorne, who nodded. Ambassador, she said slowly, we appreciate the offer, but we need to be clear about something. She stood up from her chair and walked to the viewport, looking out at the Vindicator's observation deck and the stars beyond. You've spent 3 months watching us. You've seen our wars and our peace. You've seen our kindness and our cruelty. You've seen us do beautiful things and terrible things and things that make no sense at all. And your machines looked at all of that and decided it was too much to handle. She turned back to face him. But here's what your machines missed. Here's what they couldn't calculate because it doesn't show up in data. She pointed at Colonel Okonkwo. James here lost his leg in a war he didn't believe in, fighting for a country that hadn't always fought for him. He spent 2 years learning to walk again. Then he went back to work because someone had to do it, and he'd rather be the one making the hard decisions than leave them to someone who hadn't bled for the right to make them. She pointed at Dr. Thorne. Eris spent 15 years trying to cure a disease that killed his mother. He failed. The disease still kills people. He's still trying. He'll keep trying until he dies, or the disease does, and he's not planning on dying first. She pointed at herself. I grew up in a neighborhood where the gangs recruited kids before the schools did. My brother is in prison. My sister is a doctor. Same parents. Same house. Same opportunities. One made every wrong choice. One made every right one. The probability engine would look at our family data and find no explanation for the divergence. But I know the explanation. My sister decided to be different. Just decided. No reason. No logic. Just a choice. She walked back to the table and sat down. That's what your machine couldn't calculate, Ambassador. Choice. Real choice. The kind that doesn't come from prior states or environmental factors or genetic predisposition. The kind that just happens in a moment for no reason anyone can ever fully explain. She leaned forward. We break your probability engines because we break probability. Every day, in small ways and large ones. We look at the odds and we say, so what? We look at the numbers and we say, watch this. We look at the impossible and we say, hold my beer. Colonel Okonkwo snorted. Did you really just say hold my beer in a first contact negotiation? I'm making a point, James. Your point involved beer. My point involved the fundamental unpredictability of human behavior in the face of apparent impossibility. The beer was illustrative. Thrakeel's primary and secondary brains were both working at maximum capacity, trying to process what he was hearing. The humans were not negotiating. They were explaining. And what they were explaining was that they did not fit into any framework he could construct. Ambassador, he finally said, if what you say is true, if humans can truly make choices that are not determined by prior causes, then you are not just unpredictable. You are, by the standards of every known scientific model, impossible. Elena smiled again. It was a different smile this time. Smaller. More private. We know, she said. The room was quiet for a long moment. Then Dr. Thorne spoke. Ambassador, let me tell you a story. When I was in graduate school, I had a professor who believed that everything in the universe could be reduced to mathematics. Love, hate, art, music, morality, all of it, he said, was just chemistry and physics and probability. He was brilliant. He was also wrong. Thorne reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn object. A coin Vextal saw. Old. The edges worn smooth. My mother gave me this coin when I was 10 years old. She told me it was lucky. I don't believe in luck. I'm a scientist. I know that coins have no magical properties. But I've carried this coin every day for 40 years. Not because I think it will change the outcome of events. Because carrying it reminds me that some things matter for reasons that can't be measured. He held up the coin. Your probability engine would look at this coin and calculate its mass, its composition, its age, its monetary value. It would find nothing remarkable. It would conclude that my attachment to this object is irrational and probably pathological. And it would be right in every way that matters to a machine. He put the coin back in his pocket. But it would also be wrong. Because the coin isn't about the coin. It's about my mother. It's about a 10-year-old boy who needed to believe that someone was looking out for him. It's about 40 years of memory and meaning and love, none of which can be reduced to data points. Your machine couldn't calculate that because your machine was looking for the wrong things. Frakael sat in silence, his third eye slowly closing. You are saying, he said carefully, that our probability engines failed because we were trying to predict the wrong variables. I'm saying your probability engines failed because you were trying to predict humans at all. We're not a problem to be solved, Ambassador. We're a story to be told. And stories don't follow probability curves. The silence stretched out, filling the room like water finding its level. Then Colonel Okonkwo spoke. Here's what I don't understand, he said. You came all this way. You watched us for months. Your machines freaked out and died. And now you're sitting here offering us an alliance. What? Frakael considered several responses. He considered diplomatic language, carefully crafted to avoid commitment. He considered strategic language, designed to maximize advantage. He considered scientific language, precise and dispassionate. In the end, he told the truth. Because we are afraid of you. Okonkwo's eyes widened slightly. Come again. We have encountered many species. We have studied them, predicted them, and either incorporated them into the syndicate or neutralized them as threats. We have never encountered a species we could not predict. We have never encountered a species that broke our machines by simply existing. We have never encountered a species that looked at impossible odds and said, "Hold my beer." He paused, letting the words settle. You terrify us. Not because you're stronger or smarter or more advanced. Because you are incomprehensible. And incomprehensible things cannot be controlled, cannot be negotiated with, cannot be predicted. The only thing we can do with an incomprehensible species is either destroy it or befriend it. And we have concluded that destroying you would be inadvisable. Elena's smile returned, wider this time. So you want to be friends because we scare you? I want to be friends because the alternative is unacceptable. And because, I must admit, I find your weirdness somewhat endearing. Okonkwo barked a laugh. Endearing. The alien ambassador finds us endearing. Your dog. The one on the skateboard. I watched that footage. I have watched it 17 times. I still do not understand why you were trying to teach a quadruped to use a wheeled conveyance. But the joy on your face when the dog briefly stood on the board, that I understood. That was not calculation. That was not strategy. That was simply happiness. And happiness, I have learned, is worth more than any probability projection. The room fell silent again. But it was a different silence this time. Softer, almost warm. Elena stood up and extended her hand. Frakael recognized the gesture from his research. A human greeting, a sign of trust. Ambassador, she said, welcome to Earth. We're happy to scare you. And we'd be honored to be your friends. Frakael extended his primary manipulator. It was not shaped for handshakes. Xylo's appendages were designed for precision, not grasping, but he did his best. The honor, he said, is ours. The handshake was awkward, clumsy, and completely outside any diplomatic protocol either species had ever developed. It was also, Vextal later reflected, the most hopeful moment he had ever witnessed. Later that night, Earth night, local time, Vextal stood on the observation deck alone, watching the planet rotate beneath him. The lights of human cities glittered in the darkness. Millions of points of illumination scattered across the continents like seeds thrown by a careless hand. He thought about what Dr. Thorne had said, about stories and probability curves, about coins and mothers and 40 years of memory. He thought about the child who had named the Thunder Steve. He thought about the probability engines, both of them smoking in their death throes because they had encountered something they could not compute. And he thought about the handshake, clumsy and awkward and Wrong in every way that mattered to protocol. Right in every way that mattered to anything else. Commander? Jervok's voice came from behind him. The new probability engine has stopped smoking. It appears to have entered a standby mode. What is it doing? It is watching the humans. Not analyzing. Not calculating. Just watching. The way we might watch a sunset. The way we might listen to music. The way we might, he paused, searching for the right word. The way we might appreciate something we don't fully understand. Bextal nadi slowly. Leave it on, he said. Let watch. Let learn. Maybe someday it will understand. And if it never does, Bextal looked at Earth one more time. At the lights. At the impossibility. At the species that broke machines and named thunderstorms and taught dogs to skateboard. Then, it will have learned the most important thing of all, he said. What's that? That some things aren't meant to be understood. They're meant to be experienced. And the universe is richer for their mystery. He turned away from the viewport. Set a course for the Syndicate homeworld. We have a report to deliver. What will you tell them? Vextal considered the question. I will tell them, he said finally, that we have found a species that cannot be calculated. That makes choices that cannot be predicted. That carries lucky coins and names their fears and laughs in the face of impossible odds. He paused, and I will tell them that we should be very, very glad that species decided to be our friends. Because the alternative, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. On the view screen, Earth turned. The lights of human cities continued to shine. And somewhere on the surface, a 7-year-old girl was probably having a conversation with something that shouldn't be spoken to, giving it a name that shouldn't fit, and proving once again that the universe contained more than any machine could ever calculate. The probability engines, both of them, remained silent. For once, that was exactly the right answer. The Xylos Syndicate would spend the next century trying to understand humanity. They would build better engines, gather more data, refine their models. And every time they thought they had finally cracked the code, some human would do something that made no sense. Adopt a stray animal from a war zone. Refuse evacuation to save a stranger. Spend 10 years building a working replica of a fictional spaceship. And the engines would smoke and scream and die. Eventually, the Syndicate stopped trying to understand. They started simply watching. And that they discovered was enough. Because humans weren't a problem to be solved. They were a story to be told. And some stories, the best stories, are better when you don't know how they end.